Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Umwe Sit Downs. My name is Brian Akambonde, your one and only host. And today we are joined by Sima Luipert. I'm sure I got the name correct. I practiced a little bit before the call. But Ms. Sima, please welcome. Just say a warm welcome to our audience and whatever else you'd like to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege, a rare privilege, and I'm happy to share my views with the audience out there. My name is Sima Luipert. I'm a granddaughter of a genocide survivor, and so yeah, this is where we are now.
And Sima, thank you so much for introducing yourself and essentially telling us who you are. Because my first question is really one that I think is connected to what has life, looked like after the genocide for communities that were really affected by the genocide. And so, as horrific as the genocide was, there is still very little commemoration, I feel, locally towards the genocide and it seems like there's disconnection from what from how it has shaped lives for Hereros and Namas today, and so I'd like to ask you, how has the genocide shaped the lives and wealth of people in your community? Because I feel like, once again, Namibians themselves in the world, I think, are not so well connected to exactly how the genocide has gone on to shape lives of members of your community and yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that question needs to be contextualized a little bit, and we need to go back a little bit in order to understand the very reason why the genocide took place in the first instance. We need to understand that a decision was made already in Europe, in Berlin itself, in 1880. It started in 1883 to 1884. Where it was decided that the African continent would be carved up into pieces at the will of the European nations so that they could start to exploit the African continent, and Namibia was just one of them. And Namibia, or today's present-day Namibia, happened to be a gift that was given, I guess, to the Imperial German Reich. And so this is where it all started. And the whole idea of Lebensraum and finding space for the European settler in the African continent, that was really the idea behind it. But we need to understand that when these European settlers came to Africa, they didn't find open territories where nobody existed. They came to spaces that were occupied by people. And the people who occupied these spaces had very highly sophisticated political structures and political organizations. Already in 1858, way before the Europeans arrived or the Germans arrived in what is present-day Namibia, the leaders of the great Namqua land and the leaders of Ovaherero land sat together and they signed a treaty, and this treaty sealed the territorial spaces of the Nama people, and that territorial space was known as Great Namaqua land. And another important aspect of this treaty that was signed in Huachanas in 1858 is that it was almost like a bilateral agreement with the neighboring nation, which was the Ovaherero people, that they would have certain rules along which they would cooperate with each other. So these are the kind of very sophisticated political structures that were already existing way before the Berlin Conference even started. So I think that needs to be clarified, that the Europeans didn't come into an empty space that was not occupied by people, or that there were people who were just sort of roaming around without having any territorial space that they could call it is their space. So really, and it is also for this reason that when Lloyd Vine came, he had to sign protection treaties. He had to enter into legal agreements with the leaders of those territorial spaces. And so the first agreement was started, the very first agreement was started in southern Namibia, in the territory of the Nama people. And these protection treaties were actually meant to start the process of dispossessing people of their land. And it is this resistance against the dispossession that actually led to the genocide. So when the protection treaties seem too much of a diplomatic manner in order to confiscate all these lands and get rid of these people, von Trotta was sent in. And von Trotta came with a very clear mission, and that was to get rid of specifically the Nama people and the Ovaherero people. They had to either leave the territory or they had to be shot. They had to be shot dead. And so this is how the extermination orders were made by von Trotta. And this is how the people lost their land. This is how the people lost all their property, all their livestock. The expropriation order of 1905, that one made sure that no land any longer belonged to any Nama person or to any Ovaherero person. The livestock expropriation order that was passed in 1907 made sure that no Ovaherero person, neither a Nama person, has got any property in terms of livestock. So this is the reality that we are sitting with. Those losses that were experienced at the time were never addressed. We are almost 33 years into independence. These communities were put into native reserves. The establishments of the native reserves started with the Germany. It was further entrenched by the British and then later by apartheid South Africa. So the land on which we are now remains the same land whose original purpose was for us to be slave labor, to act as a cheap source of slave labor from which the colonial master and the new settler could draw this labor at whatever price, or not even a price, if it so wishes to do so. And this is the current reality. And this is why the land issue is such an important issue for the Nama people. I think during the second land conference, when southern Namibia rose up and said, this is our land and this is our dignity, this is about our identity, the rest of Namibia was in shock, because we failed to understand where these deep feelings are coming from. It comes from a space that has left people landless, that has left people identityless, that has left people in trauma, that has left people remain the slaves and the cheap labor that they were intended for.
And I guess yeah, I guess you can segue into that, but I think very well said, Sima. You know, how has that kind of then generationally, right, impacted perhaps your mother and then yourself? I think it'll be perhaps if you're comfortable with this, it will be interesting to look at it from the standpoint of your own personal story, if that's okay with you. You know, to share with me. You know, you said your grandmother was a victim, and I think maybe perhaps tell us about your grandmother's story and how is that, how essentially from your grandmother life has gone on to your mother and then yourself. I think we will see, and for the first time here, somebody really tell us, right? How has those decisions, impacted, your life today as a member of the Nama community?
Yes. My great-grandmother was the daughter of Cornelius Frederik. Cornelius Frederik was a Gaup, a king of the Nama people, particularly those people referred to as the Aman people in the Patani area. In 1905, when people started being rounded up in order to be taken to Shark Island, my great-grandmother was one of them. It is also at this Shark Island that Cornelius Friedrich was beheaded. The General von Trotta put a price of 3,000 Deutschmark on his head, and he wanted this man dead or alive. So he was rounded up and he was beheaded, and his skull was taken to Germany, and that skull still remains in Germany. We haven't been the skull of our great-great-grandfather hasn't been handed back to us by Germany, and the rest of his body, half of his body, has been buried in spaces that we don't even know where those spaces are. So this is the trauma that we are with. My great-grandmother was subjected to rape, as all the other women in these concentration camps were subjected to incessant rape. When the concentration camps were closed or were supposed to be closed in 1905, these people were moved to other camps where they were supposed to be slave laborers. And my great-grandmother was moved to the Karibib area in what was now then known as the Okawayo concentration camp. This is also where my grandmother was born. My great-grandmother was rented out to the new German settlers. Obviously, they were not paid for their labor because they were slaves, so to speak. So these camps were a source of drawing these women for domestic labor on farms that used to be their farms. They no longer could have access to these farms apart from serving as slave labor. It was in these farms, settler farms, that my great-grandmother was raped. And this is how my grandmother was born, to a German settler, together with two other siblings. So she was born in 1913 to this German settler, and this is who I am. I am a descendant of a woman who was raped, and I have grandcousins who might be German somewhere, and this is our reality. So that is my personal story.
I think that was such a powerful story to hear, and you know, just personally, even being a Namibian from you know, based in Walvis Bay, I've never in my life, you know, just heard how your lineage has been shifted, right, by the genocide. And it was a very interesting story, because I think as well, at least in what I've noticed in my own culture, these things are not documented as to, okay, who is my great-grandmother, and so I think because of that, it has been quite challenging to really reconnect truly with the genocide and understand, okay, how is it changed life for Namibians, right? And the second, you know, this next question I'm about to ask you, Sima, I mean, it sounds ridiculous for me to ask you this question after what you just so, you know, eloquently told me, but it's 1.3 billion, you know, over now, and this is euros, right? It's over 1 billion over 30 years, a fair sum to be given, you know, especially when it's called financial support, you know, by the German government, following the announcement of the foreign minister saying that they are committing to financial support of over 1 billion euros over 30 years. Is that fair?
Yeah, firstly, to start with, it becomes so difficult to put a price to the life, to human life. You know, just the loss of human life. We saw with the Black Lives Matter what happened to the young gentleman that was killed by the police officer, or that is alleged to have been killed by the police officer in the US. And just for one family, what the US president has offered to that family, and you compare it to an entire community of people that are destined for genocide and whose population has not been halved, but more than half the population, Nama population, was killed. So to put a price to those lives gone, and just, unilaterally killed, that in itself is already something that is really quite painful. But on top of that, if you are saying that you are going to give 1.1 billion euros over a period of 30 years, that in itself does not even compensate for all the other losses, except for the loss of life that I've already spoken about. So it is really for people like us who have directly felt the impacts and who live with those impacts, it is taking a knife that is already in your flesh, and it is digging that knife a little bit deeper into your flesh. It is not just a slap in the face. It is complete disrespect. It is an objectification of our people, an objectification that is only being confirmed. It is an objectification that started with the arrival of the colonialist. The reason why colonialism could be implemented is because the native had to be turned into an object which can be used at will by whoever wants to use that object. And I think the same thing is happening here. We are not even speaking about the loss of all the property without any compensation. This is now just our personal property that we had, which was never given back to us. We are not talking about the loss of the land, which stretches from the central parts of Namibia until the Orange River. This is the land that was lost with a stroke of a pen in Germany, in the Imperial German Reich, and nothing has been done to return that land to us. That is the loss. And how do you quantify that into money now? And you are telling me about 1.1 billion over 30 years. That is an insult. I will not even begin to start talking about the loss of culture, the loss of our political structures, the loss of our religion, the loss of our language, the loss of our names. My name is Sima Luipert. How on earth can a Nama woman be Sima Luipert? Luipert is a German name. I asked my father once, how did we get to this name? He said our people had to protect themselves and they started taking on German names. My father cannot even recall anymore what the name was or what his name was supposed to be. And this is the loss that we are dealing with. And we are talking about hospitals, roads, tar roads. We are talking about a few clinics. These are projects that are the responsibility of the Namibian government. These are not projects that are the responsibility of the German government. The responsibility of the German government is to repair the damage that it has done to the Nama and the Ovaherero people. Reparation is not development aid. So we seem to be talking about two different issues here.
Right, and hearing your response to this, it made me realize that I missed a crucial question before asking this one, which is looking a bit more into the events, right, that or the efforts from the Nama community and or the Ovaherero community, depending on what you're best familiar with. But I'd like to hear you tell us a bit more about the efforts that have led to the official negotiations, beginning in 2015 between the Namibian government and the Ovaherero and the German government. Can you tell us a bit more about any efforts from the Nama community and the leaders thereof since 1990 to sort of actually get now the two governments to start sitting at a table? Because that's one thing, again, that people, I think, are not too familiar with. They just hear that 2015 things started, but I'm sure, right, there was a lot of hard work that went into making sure that, okay, things start off now officially in 2015.
Yes, I think we need to understand that the entire colonial period did not allow for these two communities to be able to speak about genocide. After the Germans left, we were occupied by the British, then by apartheid South Africa, and the purpose of these colonial regimes were really to further entrench colonialism. So there was never really any space to talk about this genocide and to take this issue up. However, we must not forget that this was also a period during which, after the genocide, people were trying to regroup themselves. People were trying to pick up the shreds and the bits and pieces of who they were, their families, trying to reconnect with their families, just being human beings, if you can say it like that. So the period leading up to independence was really about getting rid of colonial power and moving towards independence. And so freedom and independence was really the collective goal of all Namibians, regardless of their ethnic origins. And so this is also where the whole slogan of One Namibia, One Nation came about. But we must understand that the genocide issue was never really scraped off the table, especially for the two communities that were genocided against. But we were still in this independence euphoria. It did not gain any prominence. However, I must say that the Ovaherero and the Nama people were particularly vocal during the 1991 First National Land Conference, where the demand for ancestral land formed a key demand during those resolutions. And that already shows you that the issue of genocide was central to this whole question of land. But then government was taking a really long time to deal with this issue. Even the land issue was not dealt with properly. So people started getting impatient. Even if the Nama leaders and the Ovaherero leaders were not discussing these issues necessarily in the public space, there were a lot of meetings that were happening between the Nama leaders and the Ovaherero people. I know this because, well, I come from a very politically active family. And so I know that there have been a lot of discussions that have been going on amongst Nama leaders, but not only amongst them, but also between the Nama and the Ovaherero leaders. So this is not something that started in 2015. It is something that has been ongoing ever since this genocide happened. It is only that the post-independence period provided the space for people to be able to talk about it. In 2006, the motion was tabled. When the motion was tabled, really everybody was very happy about this because because the motion said very clearly that the German government now should sit on the one side of the table. The Nama and the Ovaherero people, through their leaders and their structures, should sit on the other side of the table. And the Namibian government should be mediating this process between these two groups that against which this genocide was committed. The then Minister of International Affairs, Utoni Nuyoma, clarified this policy position when he said that the Namibian government would be a facilitator in the process. However, that did not happen. And from 2015 onwards, things became, there was no agreement as to who should be on the table and who should be in the driving force, who should be in the driver's seat of this whole process. And this is where the stalemate came. This is where really the deadlock has been. There was a letter that was written in 2017. There was a meeting, and in 2017, in that meeting, it was decided, and there was a breakthrough in this meeting. It was decided that the group would sit again after 2 weeks. From 2017, we are now in 2021. Nothing happened. I know the last letter was written in 2018. Until now, it was not even acknowledged, and nothing has been said. This process has been going on for almost 15 years, officially, for 15 years.
Wow, Sima, I think what you said right there is something that I think is just so profound in so many ways, because as you said towards the end, right, many people are looking at the backlash as something that is only coming in response to the deal, as in there was nothing, no voice, no efforts, right, from the Nama community and the Ovaherero community to address this matter. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, there's been a lot of work, as you clearly explained and walked us through. And clearly, there has still been, from I guess, like a local standpoint and the international standpoint, it does seem that the announcement appears to be a bit of a surprise, and I'm very curious to hear from your standpoint, Sima, to what extent is this announcement or proposal, then the announcement by the German foreign minister, a surprise to the Herero and Nama communities? Because it seems like, as you said, there were challenges to sort of get the input of Nama community leaders and also the Ovaherero community leaders, so that they are involved in the negotiations. It seems there's already a challenge there. So I'm very curious to understand, to what extent is this a surprise, to those from the Ovaherero community?
Yes, as I said, there was really no consultation. When the announcement came, I think it came as a shock for most of us, at least for those of us who are directly affected by this issue, because we have been following these discussions very closely. Just a month before the announcement was made, it was stated in Parliament by the Prime Minister that they have made some inroads, but they have not been able to come to an agreement in terms of the amount. She also mentioned that they have in principle agreed that they should not be stuck in one place because of this non-agreement about the amount, but that they should in the meantime start with social projects and development projects which would help the Namibian government to implement its Vision 2030 and also to meet its targets for the Namibia Development Plan, NDP 5. Obviously, development aid, as I already said, and what the Prime Minister is talking about, which is fine. If the German government wants to give development aid to the Namibian government, that is fine, that is not a problem. But we should not confuse that with reparations and with acknowledgement of genocide. I think that needs to be clear. But the reason why this also came as a shock is that the Namibian president announced that there is a deadlock. So all this time we are thinking there is a deadlock, and then all of a sudden this announcement does not come from the Namibian government, but an announcement comes out of Germany through the German press from the German government telling us that an agreement has been reached. Only 3 or 4 weeks before, we were told that an agreement has not been reached. So the manner in which this news came, that was very surprising, and it is no wonder that there has been such a strong reaction by both the Nama leaders and the Ovaherero leaders, because really, how can you talk about reconciliation if you haven't even spoken or sat at a table with the people with whom you are supposed to reconcile with? Who are you reconciling with?
So clearly, there's been clear before we talk about how this deal can be changed to start looking as something that is fair, and respectful of what has been done in the past, right? Let's quickly talk about continue to talk about the agency and the surprising element of this announcement. There is clear backlash from prominent members of the Nama and Ovaherero communities, but it seems Germany plans to, or when they announced this, they were planning to officialize this very soon. There are talks of I believe the minister, if not even the president, looking to of Germany, right? Looking to come to Namibia to begin that process. And so, what is your take on that rush? And is the opportunity for the concerns being echoed by both the Nama and the Ovaherero communities to still be considered and and for renegotiation to take place, or what is the status of your backlash and response to be considered in actually before this deal is signed? Is there still space and time for that?
Yes, yes. Yes, I think we have come to a point where we really need to be honest with ourselves. We need to take away arrogance. I think in Namibia we are all people who want to live in a geographic space where people are at peace, where people feel that they are equally citizens of such a territorial space, geographical space, which we call Namibia. We don't have any other home, and we want to have live in peace with each other. But we cannot do that. We cannot do that if we continue to ignore the voices of people, if we continue to ignore very legitimate demands that people are making, demands that people have not started making now, but that demands that people have been making for 113 years. What we are doing right now is not going to bring a solution. It is making people agitated. It is frustrating people. It is making people feel as if they are not seen. And it is because of the fact that that we were not seen, that we were deemed appropriate to be killed out, to be annihilated, to be exterminated. And deep down, we are asking, is it the same attitude that is driving this current process, that we are actually not worthy of being seen, when we are saying from the bottom of our hearts, listen to us, see us, we are human beings, we have the right to express ourselves, we have the right to determine our own destiny, and therefore sit with us at the table.
The key things that have been very wrong with the announcement and news that came out of Germany is that and the whole entire sort of genocide and how it's been and how the negotiations have been handled is I just wanted to your final comment here, Sima. I just wanted to get your comment on what you think is a fair revision, right, of what has been announced from Germany, that over 1 billion euros over 30 years. What is a fair revision, and what are areas that really need to be looked at, to now start making this offer, sound less insensible and bring it to a place that is fair?
Yeah, first I must clarify that I don't even think we should be talking about money at this point. I could say to the German government, I could say, give me $1, only $1, $1. If I say to you, give me that $1, would you be able to see me as a human being? Would you admit guilt? Would you admit guilt to a crime that you have committed? Let's first start there. I don't think we should even be talking about money at this point. I just want to contextualize that. So any type of reconciliation or any type of reconstruction, that in itself, it must be preceded by agreeing on the process itself. And we haven't seen the agreement that is there. It hasn't been preceded by an agreement on the process that will lead to a solution. And I just want to emphasize that the process in itself really largely determines the outcome. If you don't get the process right, you are going to sit with an outcome that cannot be legitimized, because the process is not legitimate in its own right. It is also important to name to name the so-called affected parties, because we keep talking about affected parties, the different regions and so on. What is so difficult to say Nama and Ovaherero? I think we need to name it. And the reason why we don't want to name it is because once we name it, then we will agree that there was a genocide against a specific ethnic group. That is what genocide is. It is against a specific ethnic group. It is not about, it is not against a Namibian government. It is not about a government. It is not committed against a government. It is committed against a people that are specifically named. And in this instance, the Nama and the Ovaherero people were specifically named. For the victim communities, it is not necessarily about the financial issues, but it is about starting to accept that the victims are actually human beings. If you refuse to talk to someone and you see that person as an object is something that stands there. It is static. And the way that object will move is determined by an external force. The object cannot decide by itself in which direction it moves. However, when you start to see that object as a human being, then it becomes fluid. You see a person, and that person, it is within the right of that person to determine and to think for itself, to set its own destiny, to make interpretations on its own behalf, and not necessarily interpretations being made by somebody else. I think we need to clarify that even before we start talking about any agreement. And so, like I said before, everybody wants a peaceful settlement, but we must respect each other. If we want a peaceful settlement, I think we must respect each other if we want any reconciliation. We need to name the trauma, and we need to speak to the trauma, and certainly infrastructure and social projects are not going to speak to the trauma. Those are buildings. We are not buildings. We are human beings. So see the human being first, and don't offer the human being some sort of a building. That it doesn't work like that. We will move forward if the rest of Namibia can start being in solidarity with the people against which this genocide was committed, against which this extermination order was made out. And these are the Nama and the Ovaherero people. There were people who were caught up in all of this, and we know them. We know that there were Damaras people. We know that there were San people who were equally affected, but the genocide was directed specifically against the Nama and the Ovaherero people. I think we must clarify that and understand that.
Sima, thank you so much for that insight and breakdown. I'll leave it up to you for final maybe remarks. Thank you if you'd like to say, but any last words from your side, Sima?
Yeah, we need to be careful about being arrogant, and we need to be careful about admitting when we make mistakes. I think, duality, the whole idea of duality is in the genes of the African, and duality demands mutuality, that we should be mutual. It demands that mutuality when actually arrogance supersedes agreement. I do not think that we should allow arrogance to supersede agreement, but that we should rather allow mutuality to be the victor in circumstances like this, so that we can move forward. Everybody wants to move forward, and I think it is possible. We have done it before. We are a nation that has gone through so many centuries of colonial resistance, and we do have the capacity to overcome this. But I think we need to go back to the drawing table, and we need to respect each other. We need to respect each other. If we don't respect each other, it creates resentment, it creates anger, it creates frustration, and this is not what we want. We want the Namibian people to work together to find amicable solutions for a horrendous crime that was committed in our beloved country. So with those few words, thank you for having me, and yeah, for allowing me to be in this interview.
Wonderful. That was Sima Luipert.